No, I'll stand. I can't think if I sit down. My name is Gunjan Bagla, and today we have a panel where each of the speakers could give you your money's worth, not just for today's event, but for the entire year. Okay, we have an amazing panel, and I think we'll find some wonderful ideas and thoughts, and hopefully some great questions from the audience. Okay. Number one, we will look at the journey of an entrepreneur, starting from pre-seed all the way to becoming a public company. Okay, and we have people at various stages of their journey right here on stage. Okay, so that knowledge applies regardless of whether you are in software or you're selling widgets, or doesn't matter whether you're in telecom or med tech or what. Okay, and then the second level of analysis will be based on the unique features of a medical device kind of company. Okay, so let me introduce the speakers, and I'm going to go in a particular order, not the order in which they are sitting. Okay, so Shabir is with Fisher Imaging, which is an early stage startup funded by SBIR grants. Is that accurate? Okay, and the bios and everything were listed on the website, so we won't go through all of that. Okay, and then Sanjay is with US Vascular, and the US Vascular is funded by Angels at this stage. Okay, and then we have Prabodh Mathur with Axonics Modulation, which had its IPO a few months ago. So hearty congratulations on that. Okay, and at TIE we believe in being responsive to sudden changes. So we had one speaker drop out, and my friend Atul Jhalani has kindly stepped in to provide his perspective. He's been in the medtech business now for 20 plus years. Yeah, he was the head of sales for Massimo right here in Orange County. So what I'd like to do now is pass around some index cards, because I'd like to get questions from the audience right up front. Okay, what do you want to learn from these wonderful guys? Why don't we start with the public company while this is going on? So I know all of these gentlemen for several years in most cases, and at least a year. So I'm going to go with that background. Prabodh, I know that you are a serial entrepreneur. The first company I know about that you were involved in dealt with the heart, cardiac sciences, and then you had a company that you sold for over $500 million to Boston Scientific, Wessex Vascular, and now your current company, you decided along with the executive team to take it public, which is not what you had done with the previous startup. So tell us a little bit about the difference between selling to Boston Scientific and dealing with the stock market.
I hope you guys can hear me okay in the back. Okay. So I'm Prabodh Mathur. My background is I'm a mechanical engineer by training, and very early in my career I got into doing startups, and my role has always been to bring the technology for the company. And so for each company we have done something, as you can imagine, for a startup, something that has to be unique. Every company needs a special sauce, and we have always had something that's different and special and unique about what we do. And a company in this space, it takes a lot of money, and then you have investors and they need an exit. So, like Gunjan mentioned, this company, we did an IPO. The previous company, we were simply bought out even before we began our clinical trials.
So for the people who don't know what a clinical trial is, can you give a 30-second explanation?
Oh, sure. So if you have a medical technology to be allowed to sell it in the US, you have to prove to the United States Food and Drug Administration that your device is A, safe, and B, effective. And so that means it's not going to hurt the patients, and it's going to do what you say is going to do and provide a meaningful clinical benefit to the patient. And sometimes that's an easy job, and sometimes it's very hard. And the more innovative your device is, the more proof you have to provide to the agency that what you're doing is going to provide a clinical benefit to the patient. And so you do a clinical trial, and to give you an example, at the company that I'm at today, we did 129 patients. It cost, the trial themselves cost something like $27 million to do. So it's a lot of money to support the staff that you need to do a clinical trial. So, you know, the exits are typically either you become a freestanding company and get revenue, and from the revenue you generate profits, and then you pay the investors, which most people forget, but that was actually the premise of doing stock in companies way back when the stock market opened up 2 centuries ago. The other way to provide the benefit to the early investors is to sell the company at a certain multiple of the amount that was invested. And that we did at the previous company, where the investors had put in $35 million, and Boston Scientific bought us close to $500 million. And so within a year and a half, the investors got like 12 times the money. What that did was really establish credibility for the team, and that same people invested in the next company that we did, which is Exonics. And now this time they wanted to invest not $35 million, they wanted to invest a lot more. And so, you know, when last summer we had $125 million into the company, and we would have sold it for $375. You know.
How much is it worth now, today?
Today,
$1 billion.
Yeah, today is it's $1 billion.
$1 billion.
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. So let
so
me interrupt you here just so that we can keep the conversation going.
Sure.
But thanks for that insight. So there's two kinds of money that we are really talking about, right? One kind of money comes from investors, right? And the other kind of money comes from customers, okay? And there's a third kind of money which Shabir can talk about, which comes from the government, which often wants nothing in return. They don't want equity in return. We'll get to that. But let's turn the focus to Atul, because you ran sales for for several companies. So tell me a little bit about how extracting money out of medical device customers is different from selling widgets of any other kind. What's the power of the US government? What's the power of hospitals, physicians, and what about the poor patient? Just 1 minute or two at most.
If any of you have raised money, you know it's a very difficult thing to do. But creating sales at a bigger scale is far more difficult in my opinion. I've done both to some extent. And so it's very important to be able to find a way of differentiating your product out there. And then if you're a new company, and I've done startups that we successfully grew several $1 million and sold to Edwards Life Sciences, for example, a big company, local company. And you really have to find a way of being not only very innovative, but also have a huge cost advantage. Because in today's world, the hospital systems, the physician office systems, they're all looking for a significant cost advantage. And if you're an entrepreneur, I'll advise you that if you at least don't have a 30% cost advantage and a huge clinical benefit, forget about it, move on. That's how it works. And then you have to be very innovative in figuring out what kind of channel will work for you. So for example, if you're selling a product that's a widget, meaning it's $5, you need a very different channel from an imaging system that's 5 million. You have to think about whether you go through an indirect channel, which is more based on marketing and pulling customers in, versus a push out there through a very direct sales force. And so there's very different kinds of sales you have to think about based on the kind of company you're commercializing. And then there is a completely separate thing, which is commercializing through different companies. So for Massimo, I was responsible for worldwide integration of their product in other patient monitoring companies. And that's a completely different sale. You got to talk to CEOs, to product managers, etc. So so depending on what you have in your hand, how you commercialize can be very different.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Let me turn now to Sanjay. You were at EV3, I think, when I first met you, which was then bought by Covidien, Covidien was a $12 billion company, and then Covidien was bought by Medtronic, which was what, 100 billion, 50 billion, something?
Market cap is about 80 billion.
Yeah.
The revenue is about 27 billion.
Right, it's 27 billion, okay. And you are now running a startup that has been angel funded. So can you tell us a little bit about the product? We haven't talked about your specific products.
Yeah, sure. So I've been in medical devices for 19 years at this interface of entrepreneurialism and entrepreneurialism. A lot of bigger companies, but then last couple of years at startups and trying to do my own business. There are three things that drive medical device business, and that's what differentiates us. One is that it's a regulated business. It's before you can sell a product, it has to be FDA approved. So later on, hopefully, I'll have a chance to talk about it. The second thing is access to market, which a little bit Atul talked about, a little bit other speakers talked about, Prabhu talked about. But access to market is really who has access to hospitals, and later on I'll comment on that as well. And third is the innovation. Medical device companies tend to be, in my opinion and experience, the innovation tends to be driven by a market need. So over the years, I worked in interventional device business, which is you stick a needle at the groin and using blood vessels, arteries and veins, as your highways travel inside the body to the site of the problem and fix that problem. Which means you don't need to cut the body open, eliminate the open surgery and do it minimally invasively. So for last 19 years, I have just taken one part of the body at a time, and for 2-3 years, developed a product, commercialized the product, and moved on to a different part of the body. And that includes brain, heart, gut area, legs, etc. So 2 years ago, I was in this room and I met a gentleman sitting here at the front, Peter De Silva, who is a doctor and an entrepreneur here as well. About that time, I had co-founded a company with a friend in the Bay Area, and that company has a product that's a polymer. It's a liquid polymer that you inject in a liquid state, and when it comes in contact at the other end, it precipitates as a solid. So prior to that, I had spent almost 2 decades trying to keep arteries and veins open. And this product actually occludes or closes arteries and veins. Why would you want to close patent arteries and veins in a human being, in a living human? There are lots of different reasons, it turns out. And while everybody's attention and eyes were focused on keeping them open, we started a business and to try to close it. Aneurysms, arteriovenous malformations, gastrointestinal bleeds, hemorrhages, gunshot wounds, where you need to emergently close an arteries and veins, and that's the product that we're pursuing. We hope to start a clinical trial later on in the year. We our animal testing, preclinical testing is underway. We just had a pre-sub meeting last week with the FDA.
Thanks so much, Sanjay. So let's hand the mic to Shabir. And Shabir, can you briefly describe your product for us?
Sure. So I'm Shabir Bagla. I'm in a different space from these gentlemen here. In the medical device space, my product and my company is focused on imaging, specifically cancer imaging. And we're working at this point in time on imaging early breast cancer. I don't know, I like to use shock therapy sometimes, but I like to say that, in a group like this, I don't know, 40, 50 people. I'm sure you're aware, but if you're not, 1 in 4 of us are going to die of cancer one day. And I want to say 2 in 4 of us are going to have cancer in our lifetimes. and all of us are going to be touched by cancer at some point in our lives, either a loved one or a family friend or family. So it's an important area, and the issue with cancer even now is the best chance for a cure is early detection. And yes, there's a lot of innovation going on in cancer treatment and diagnosis. To this day, despite everything, early detection is the best chance for a sustaining cure. And that's what we're trying to do in breast cancer. Now, the problem with breast cancer today is that it does a disservice to about half the women who regularly go and get what are known as mammograms. And that's because today's mammography is unable to catch disease in young women and women who have what are known as dense breasts. And the simple way I can explain that is, if you're driving down a road, if it's a nice clear day, you can see the road signs, you can see the blades of grass at the sides of the road, you can see, everything on the road. Well, now you put a fog on the road, and now everything becomes a lot harder. People start driving slowly, it's a lot more difficult driving, because you don't know whether you're going to get into an accident. That's the challenge that radiologists, these are the people who look at these images and try to figure out if this person has cancer or not. That's the challenge they have. That fog is because of the way today's technology generates images. They have a lot of scattered radiation. We get rid of that scattered radiation with our technology. Our technology provides those clear images that are necessary to tell the subtle differences that are indicative of breast cancer. And by doing so, our goal is to be able to catch that cancer early so that there is a better chance for a cure.
So Shabir, how is your company funded? Can you tell us very briefly?
Sure. So we are a startup, and we have so far been very fortunate to be funded by the National Institutes of Health. Specifically, within that, the National Institutes of Health has 18 divisions. We're funded by the National Cancer Institute. And so they have this SBIR program. We've been fortunate. We've gotten 2 consecutive grants from them, phase 1 grants. The good thing about grants from the government is it gives you your technology a lot of credibility because it goes through an expert review panel at NCI, at the National Cancer Institute. And it could lead to additional funding from venture or from angels.
And how much equity does the government take in your company?
0. It's a gift. The SBIR is a gift, and what it does is it also opens the door for future SBIR money. So we have phase 1s, and then we can get phase 2s and phase 3s and so on and so forth. So our goal is to go as far as we can with what we call non-dilutive capital, and then prove our technology, get to a point where we become attractive, because this is an area, frankly speaking, it's a multi-billion-dollar market. And so what we want to do is to get to a point where we become attractive to, there are big players in this area. And so at some point, we hope that we will be acquired, but we want to be acquired at a point where we actually make a difference in people's lives. We don't want this technology to be buried, because that is something that too often happens.
Okay, so there's a question from the audience, and I'll start with you on that. What is the transition from being an employee to being an entrepreneur like, for you personally?
Excellent question. Thank you for whoever asked that. Thank you. So when you're an employee, and I was an employee for many, many years, you have these fences built around you. There are only so many things you can do. And sometimes that's good, and sometimes that's bad. It does feel that you're being very restricted. I felt, and being an immigrant, being in this country, just my personal story, I had to obviously survive and have a family and things like that. So there are some constraints, and so for many years I was an employee, but I found, and I think you used this word, an intrapreneur. I found myself to be an intrapreneur, being an entrepreneur within an organization, trying to bring in new technology, new ideas, and thank you, Smita, for encouraging that new idea generation in us. So we did that for many years, and I was fortunate to be part of teams that we have launched some very powerful, very interesting products that are in the marketplace today. And I felt, well, I'm doing it for somebody else. Why not do it for myself? Yeah, well, that was a great idea. But once you start doing it for yourself, you find it's not that easy. And so you kind of break loose, you come out, and then you're going to fall flat on your face a few times. And so that's what's happened a couple of times. And then you're going to pick yourself up. But you do have to have that self-determination to be able to come out. And this, as you know, these gentlemen here have said, this is a tough area to be in. Medical devices, as you said, is highly regulated. Selling in the medical space is extremely difficult. No disrespect for doctors, but having the medical field is very hard to change. Physicians are very set in their ways, and they, maybe the new generation is changing a little bit.
So let me interrupt you there, and let's talk to this physician here. Okay, so I understand you're developing an artificial heart. So how do you find when you talk to your physician colleagues, Peter? This is Peter De Silva.
So you hit on the nail that physicians are very book-minded. I'll give you an example of a skin cancer, like on the face, that can be easily excised very easily. But you had a dermatologist who will make a mountain of it and take it to the operating room and do something called Mohs surgery. So I do it in my office for $300, they do it in the operating room for $5,000. And I ask them why, because that's the way they were taught to do. If they deviate from that, then their colleagues pull them up and say, how did you do that? Why did you do that? Don't you know you're supposed to do a Mohs? So physicians are very close-minded and very narrow-minded. So when you're in the entrepreneurial category and you're thinking outside the box, you're not one of them anymore. You're now a businessman. I've had many physicians say that, you're not a physician, I'm not a businessman. In other words, you shouldn't be talking to us anymore, you should be talking to somebody else who really cares. So
is that a good thing or a bad thing to your peers?
It's just the way it is. So it's refreshing to find doctors who actually have an innovative mind, and those are few and far between. And it's interesting that some of the physicians who before they became physicians were actually engineers, and these people now are the people you collaborate with. The others are going to be down the line and just use your product when it comes to market, but in between they don't want to hear about it.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. So there's another dichotomy that exists in most companies, and I want to play on that a little bit. Okay, so there's marketing and sales. Atul comes from that background, right? And nothing happens until you make a sale. Sales is the oldest profession, right? The oldest profession. Some people think something else is the oldest profession, but it's just a subset of sales, right? Yeah, okay. And then there are the engineers who think you can't sell a darn thing unless I make the world's greatest product, okay? So within the medical device space, I think this plays out interestingly, but hold your thought, because in the audience also we have somebody who's been on the technology side. So Akash, would you tell us a little bit about your perspective on what these darn salespeople do?
On the salespeople side? Well, sales in general,
Closer.
To be fair, it's the oxygen for the business, right? It's the dollars that comes into the business, so that does fund. But then again, it's everybody else on the team, like the R&D people and the innovation that creates the next pipeline of products that creates the next fresh oxygen for the business as well. So, it's a mixed team, and everybody plays an integral role in the big scheme of things.
So, in the medical device business in particular, is the balance more towards product or towards sales and marketing?
I think it's more towards the product, because the winning product creates that
The
long-term
winning
sustainable competitive advantage for the business.
Okay, so Akash says it's the product. Atul?
So I'm a mechanical engineer by training, so I understand technology very well. And I think what I've seen a lot is when you come from an engineering background, you're not really that close. It's rare, but you're not very close to what the customer really wants. So the idea that you will create a very innovative product and now the company is going to be successful, I've seen that fall flat many, many times. And the reason is that essentially, like I said, you have to have a huge advantage in the marketplace to upset the Apple product. Take out that existing technology that's there, and you have to be really sort of out there in terms of improvement as well as cost structures, etc. So I think it's not one or the other. Both things have to happen. But from my personal experience, I find that, to me, engineering side usually fails to deliver a product that should get out there and leapfrog the competition. That's what I look for. But sales is also very tricky. I mean, I think in this space, it's a very risk-averse kind of marketplace, and doctors are very conservative. And so if you don't find the right sales mechanism and the right team, you're going to fail there as well. So I'm just coming from a failure point of view. But the other side is, if you want to be successful, get a clear-cut advantage for your product and get an A team on the sales side, and then you have the oxygen to sort of fund the next thing and next thing.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so Sanjay, I have a question for you. You were at Medtronic. For those of you who don't know, Medtronic is the world's largest self-standing medical device company. Your career was doing extremely well. There was no other peak left to climb, and you left that, and then you started, short while after that, you started your own company. So I want to understand from you, why did you choose what made you decide to choose a particular funding route? Why didn't you go the SBIR route like Shabir did? Why didn't you go to VCs directly like Prabodh has? What made you choose the angel route? Our audience has that question.
Yeah, sure. For me, it's too slow, the government funding. And I've continued to work back and forth for large companies while creating a product and doing entrepreneurship in an area that doesn't conflict with the job. So I'm trying to take the easy path, frankly, and so far I've been successful. The funds that we raised for Black Swan Vascular, the company that I first co-founded, we raised about $6 million, and then last round we were oversubscribed from the first round of fund. First round, $3.5 million, $2.5 million against our goal for intermittent round of $1.5 million. We actually, as a board, had to have a meeting and extend that to, we're probably going to end somewhere $2.8 million. So time is money. We want to bring it out as quickly as we can, the product to the market, because the marketplace doesn't wait for us. So I don't have time for government money.
Got it. Okay, thanks. So Prabodh, I have a question for you. You've been through a series of companies, all very successful. So it looks very nice and rosy from the outside. But I know from interacting with you over the years that there certainly have been times when the going got very tough. And so one of the audience question is, how do you stay motivated when the going is tough? And can you describe a situation where you had to deal with failure and overcome it?
Oh, sure. None of the companies that we've talked about that I've been part of actually ended up doing the product that they were stood up for. So
I thought that only happened to internet companies.
Including Exonics. Exonics did not start with the mission to do overactive bladder. We were going out after a completely different indication of use for a similar technology and realized that the market was extremely crowded. We were not going to pay cost saving. We were not going to be innovative. And we'll be just one fish in a pond with several fish. And then we had to pivot. And there was a moment where, I remember, we had raised Series A, and now we were discovering that we really don't have a market. And it was pretty tough in the company until we systematically looked at it, not from the technology standpoint, to your point, and I think you also made the same point. It's not about the technology, it's not about your secret sauce from a technology standpoint, but where are you going to apply it and what is the clinical need? So we approached it from that viewpoint, and we found a niche space in neuromodulation, and then we morphed our product to fit that need. So yeah, you got to believe in yourself. You got to, it's always a team effort. There's not one person, not one individual who makes these decisions. But you got to have confidence that you are going to do it. And it really is, failure is really not an option. Once you have, I had a very secure position. I was a very senior person in Boston Scientific and took a 50% pay cut to come and join this wiki startup for some piece of paper that would one day be worth something, right? But it was about growth and it was not about comfort and all of that. So we were not going to just walk away having made the discovery that the money that we had raised $35 million in Series A, one of the largest Series A for a med tech company, that we were just going to go to our investors and say, sorry, we made a mistake, and we got $15 million in the bank, we'll just give your money back. And what were we going to do? So yeah, you have to, I would say you have to believe in yourself and you have to believe that there is a use for the technology, and you have to approach it not from the technology side, but from the clinical needs side and back into what you can apply the technology for.
Excellent, thank you, thank you. So how many of you in the audience are startup entrepreneurs? Okay, so I have a question now of the panel members, and I'm going to use Shabir as our example of an early stage startup. No, you don't get the mic. Okay, okay. So if each of you were advising Shabir, okay, he started his journey now on solving a very big problem, okay. Should he think about an IPO like your recent company? Should he think about angel funding, or should he just hire the best salespeople he can? What advice would you give him, and by extension to the people in the audience who are early stage entrepreneurs? So Prabodh, why don't we start from you?
Sure. So the first question that you need to have the answer for is, why can't Philips, General Electric, why can't they do this? So is it your know-how? Is it intellectual property? Is it that you have some physics and science that you have understood that they have not understood? What is it that makes it so that you can do what they can't do? This is a question that I've always been asked. And as the technology guy, before anybody put in the dollar in any of the companies that I worked at, I was asked.
Do I get to answer that?
No, hold that thought, okay? Yeah, okay, sales.
Yeah. I think I'll extend that. So it's not only just the clinical need. How is your economics different from what's out there? So meaning you're going to provide a solution, mammography provides a solution that's, 55% specific, something like that. Are you going to be 90% specific? But that doesn't matter. Is your cost still comparable, and can people really use it as the first entry point for detection? And if that economics doesn't work, you are just, it's not going to work. Right there.
Okay, Sanjay?
I think you feel passionate about what you do, and I'd urge you to continue doing that. It's the passion that will get you to your end point. I don't know anything about mammography, but I imagine what you're doing, you felt strongly enough that it's a value-added thing, and you've probably been around in the industry that what you're doing is, for some reasons, it's either better than what other people can do or are doing. So you'd always have, truly when you're trying to do something different, you're always going to have times when it's going to be difficult, but just stay the course, and as long as you love what you do, keep doing it, and results will happen. And that's what I say to Peter. I'm on Peter's board as well, and Peter, has an early stage company, very, very interesting, challenging project, and every time we hit one of those bumps, that's what I tell him, just stay the course.
So the question for you, Shabir, is, are these answers useful?
Oh, absolutely. They're very useful. These are exactly the kind of things we think about every day. Why is it that we think we're going to be successful, whereas GE and Siemens and Philips and Fuji and all of these other large corporations who have armies of scientists and developers and salespeople and all kinds of. And so when you work in the medical device field, one of the first things you have to think about is how do you protect your invention, your innovation. You know, do you have, and it's also very expensive, and that's one of the reasons why you have to raise these large amounts of money. And sometimes when you don't have the money, then you have to establish the partnerships and things like that. So that's one of the first things we had to do. We had to secure our intellectual property. Now you can do all of that, but if you have a company which has armies of scientists, they can work around your patents. Fortunately for us, one of the issues, or this particular, which is kind of unique, not necessarily unique, but fairly common in this area, is a lot of these medical device companies have invested millions and tens and hundreds of millions of dollars into the existing technologies. They have spent so much money that they're married to them. They will not change them even if they have something that is 5 times better, because they'll have to change their whole product portfolio. And so that's one of the hidden benefits we have. I don't know if you guys agree with that or not. But the thing is that in order, and that's one of the reasons why you don't see a whole lot of innovation. I'm willing to bet that that's one of the reasons why these two gentlemen left their high-profile jobs in large corporations and decided to go and do something more innovative. Because that's where innovation happens. Innovation happens in small entities. And to speak to your point about the healthcare economics, I think it's very important. In today's healthcare market, it's not enough to have something that is 5% better or 10% better. And even if that is, you have to make a clear case for that. You have to show that how is your product going to not just make a slightly better diagnostic or a slightly better therapeutic. You've got to show how is it going to change that healthcare paradigm for that particular patient. What is it going to do that will improve that patient's life? Healthcare is so expensive. We spend 20% of our GDP on healthcare. How is it going to reduce the cost? Because every hospital in the country is looking at how can new technology help me get the cost down. If you're exactly the same as everybody else, but your cost is 5 times lower, guess what? You have a winning product.
Okay, great. So,
I want to add one more thing here.
Sure.
There's really good news for you, Shabir. I've worked for very small companies and very big companies. I've never seen a big company innovate anything. Period. It's what I call destination companies. GE, Siemens, Philips, Medtronic. They just buy technology that comes out and then they commercialize it. So their strength is on the commercialization side, not on the innovation side.
okay, so I want to take a slightly different twist now. My day job, you know, when I'm not moderating these panels, is really helping Western companies to deal with India. Okay, and since many of us are from India, you know that the government has launched a program there for free medical insurance for 500 million of the poorest Indians. Okay, the next 300 or 400 million Indians can also likely not afford any of the devices that your companies make today. Okay, most Western companies today are targeting the richest 1 billion people on the planet, and we have about almost 7 billion people. So my question, you know, since each of us is here is of Indian origin, you know, what will it take for innovation to reach the next 3 or 4 billion people? You know, what are the opportunities you see? Maybe there's someone here in the audience, you know, who's going to make a $5 stent, you know, or something like that. Who wants to take that question? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is an evolution. So what we are working on here and things in California, that's the cutting edge innovation, trying to develop solutions to diseases, the solutions that don't exist. And that cutting edge solution often comes with a premium price. And that generally is targeted towards those billion people in the world, not 7 billion. Over time, next 10 years past the cutting edge innovation is when I'd say the prices begin to come down, the competition grows, and the middle layer of countries, the businesses have begun to grow. But now, as I look at, the medical device companies used to say U.S., Europe, and rest of the world in my own career time. Then it became U.S., Europe, APAC, and Latin. Now it's U.S., Europe, China, Japan, and rest of the world. So India is still in the rest of the world, and unfortunately, from when I've traveled to India at least a couple of times trying to talk to people about medical devices there, I don't think it's going to change in the next 5 to 10 years. It's still going to remain in the rest of the world, but China is definitely emerging as a very, very powerful marketplace for medical devices. That's my perspective.
So I have a slightly different perspective on this. So first thing is, one angle is that the economy in India is improving and people are going to come up in terms of what they're able to pay. The second thing that's happening, and I'm kind of involved in this in a hidden manner, is that vital signs are always measured when people get sick. But the funny thing about all this is that if you measure them when they're healthy and early, you can do it at a very low cost. So there's already companies emerging in India that are able to manage people's health from very early on at a very, very low cost that's competitive in a place like India. So it's what's going to change. And the second thing that's going to change is that today we have more AI-driven technologies that are coming out where it's not about the cost, it's about able to read stuff from a software point of view much better. So that's another area where countries like India can leapfrog. And the last thing is that in telemedicine, they're going to be reading studies as laws kind of shift around, hopefully, studies in India and places like that. So that's going to improve innovation in that part of the world and bring technology faster than we might think.
Okay. So what I've seen in recent years is that innovation in India is really happening centered on the smartphone. You have a computer that was more powerful than the devices that send man to the moon, right, in your hand. And in India, people are beginning to use the smartphones for digital health in ways that Western companies don't even think about or care about today. And I suspect that we will see a breakaway company coming out from that part of the world that will affect not just the Indian population, but the 6 billion of the rest of the world that we are talking about. Also, I've seen examples of American entrepreneurs innovating for India. I helped a startup out of Stanford that has negative pressure wound therapy. If a wound isn't healing for a long time, there's a solution out there that costs several $1,000s. That's the market leader. They have a solution using modern sensors that does the same job for $49. Okay, so it's that there's no way that the legacy company can compete with a product that costs 10% of the market leader. There's another company that has a blood test in a similar manner being developed in California with $40 million of venture funding that will perform certain blood tests instantly for $6 or $7 a test. Okay, so their hope is to sell 20 million of those tests a year to the state of Maharashtra alone. Okay, so the way they make money is not by charging lots, but by selling an immense amount. Okay, so those things are happening. They're still early stage. We don't know whether they will succeed or not, but there's tremendous innovation happening in the rest of the world that I think will ultimately take India out of this classification, which only the medical device industry has. The two words, I work with many different industries, and medtech is the first industry where I heard the word OUS. There is the US and everything else, from Canada to Latin America to China is clubbed into this term called OUS, as if it's one place somewhere. You go to OUS and you sell there, right? Likewise, ROW. Where the heck is ROW? Are you going to sell to Norway like you sell to Vietnam? Only in the medtech business do I hear these terms. Okay, and I think that's starting to change. But what I want to do now is a couple of quick questions came up from the audience. Somebody asked about crowdfunding. And do any of you disagree that crowdfunding is not a great mechanism to build a medtech company?
I have no experience in that. I don't know.
Yes. Same for me. I did get approached when I went to Tycon by some people saying that I could do a crowdfunding, but let alone crowdfunding. I mean, I wouldn't talk to this many people about what I'm doing and that I need to raise money. So I'm very private and very selective about whom we go to and how we raise money to make the most out of our time to raise money. So I'm definitely not and that's just my own inexperience and perspective. That's not to say that it doesn't work. I'm sure it does, and it works for lots and lots of people in lots of fields.
Yeah, but you haven't heard of a medtech company being funded by crowdfunding, right?
It depends. I think there may be some opportunities for crowdfunding for some products, but as a general rule, because of the highly regulated nature, there are things you just cannot say in your crowdfunding pitch.
Exactly.
That you can say for other products.
Got
And
it.
you have to be very careful, obviously, about that. And frankly speaking, the amount of money that is required for launching a medtech product
Right.
may not lend itself to a crowdfunding. But again, you never say never.
Okay. Now, there are some questions about the role of the FDA and details around clinical trials and so on. Those are not bad questions, but what I would suggest is that we take them individually with the speakers afterwards, because not everybody in the audience would be interested in the detailed answers to those questions. So I've tried to address most of the index cards in one way or another. If someone had a pressing question that I didn't address, please raise your hand.
There was a gentleman here.
It's okay. We moved down from the topic. I'll ask you guys individually.
Can I ask one small question?
Yes. Hold on.
From the time you innovate a particular product or particular idea, and by the time you bring it to the market, how do people usually ensure that you are still having the first mover advantage? Means particularly since you have mentioned that time is of the essence, for example in your case, and Shabir is getting government funding, which probably is not on a specific time schedule. So what is the usual process? Means there are many people who are thinking of innovations in this particular space. How do you ensure that you are still the first mover when you bring out that product?
I'm sure each of us has a perspective on it. There's about 4 to 5 medical device companies can thrive in a given area. It's not a huge field like consumer products. And so if you are in those 4 or 5, then your product still has to work. It has to do the job that you think it does. Then you're going to win. And a lot of times people get an exit even way before then, and the product may never see the light at the end of the day. But that's the idea, that you want to be in that first couple of companies to hit the market.
So, that's actually a very good question because, as you know, it takes a long time to do development. The way we have always done it in all the companies that I've been part of founding is we very early on form a scientific advisory board, and we recruit the key opinion leaders. So in our case,
Are these physicians?
yes. So in our case,
So the conservative physicians who otherwise wouldn't move,
Right.
you sign them up early.
So there are people. For example, in our case, we went straight to the president of the American Neuromodulation Society, and we said we want you to be part of our team. And we showed up with stock options and a lot of money, and he signed up. Now he is wired in with every company, so he is also a consultant to Medtronic, to Boston Scientific, to Edwards Life Sciences.
So would you give this advice to Sanjay and Shabir to
Yeah.
form a
So
scientific
now, of course, you have NDAs and everything, but, go out for dinner after the second bottle of wine. No, really, it's as simple as that. It's not one person. I mean, we recruited like 7 or 8 key opinion leaders, and we did it. We found those people who are consultants with the other companies, and this is all public knowledge now. So no physician is able to now hide behind some cloak of anonymity because they have to disclose all of this.
So are those the sunshine laws that you're talking about?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
And so, they're right. So now when they disclose, in the second slide of any paper they present, they say we are consultants to, Medtronic, Edwards, Exonics. and it's all up there. This slide is presented for 1 second, but so that's how you know what really is happening in the other companies, and whether what your idea that you have is still fresh or not, and the advantages that you think that you have, how the other companies respond to it, and you get quite a bit of information from there.
Yeah. So in the medtech business, longevity, your own personal longevity as the entrepreneur can be really important. I'm helping an Israeli startup that is just getting ready to launch products worldwide. The paper that described the product was written in 2007. Okay, they raised only about $5 million until last year. And then they got to a point where they could raise $30 million. And these guys are ambitious Israelis. They want to launch in the US, India, Israel, and Europe at the same time. Only an Israeli company would try that. I don't think any of you would go to 4 markets at the same time. But they waited a long time. The chief scientist now I think is 80-something years old. So they're all seasoned people. And so the model of a medtech entrepreneur is not often, the 22-year-old graduate, who's going to suddenly, make $1 billion company, And we saw one like that up north, Elizabeth Holmes, and look what happened to her. So we won't talk further about that one right now. Are there any other questions from the audience that we haven't addressed? Okay. Are there any other points that the panelists want to make that
I just want to make a point to the
Sure.
question again. So I think one other perspective I'll bring to that question is that in medical, everything is bound by the patient population. So markets are not very big. So you have to think of it like in the consumer products, for example, you make iPhone, everyone will buy it, but that's not the case in medical. You got a very bound problem in terms of number of patients that this will apply to. And then there's a different thing which I've seen a lot is the industry itself is very small. There's like 4 or 5 people who continue to innovate as a core team in different companies. So it's very, very easy to find out. Even a salesperson, a marketing person, a manager can find out whether this product is unique or not. It's not that difficult.
Okay, so what I want to do is have one round with each of the panelists with any last words of something that you wanted to share with the audience that we didn't get to. And why don't we start with you, Sanjay?
Sure. So again, I want to leave you with 3 things. That it's a need-driven world. Think of the need first. It's you can get there multiple ways. You can that I know this software, I know this material, I know this technology. Where do I apply it in the body? That's one way to get there. But a lot of medical device companies, successful innovation happens based on when you know a need. Now think of whatever technologies are going to serve that need. And I'm going to bring those technologies together to serve. At least that's what I'm doing, and that's what I think works for a lot of people in medical devices. So need-driven. Remember, it's a regulated industry, but it's not impossible. There's procedures and there's people who understand the regulatory processes, and you can do it too. And third thing is the access to market. That's a privilege of certain large corporations that have access to market. So if you innovate, then ultimately they are going to be the buyers for your product. So you're not thinking, for the most part, if it's a medical device, it's not a consumer product. It's a product that's often sold to hospitals or healthcare providers by those channels, larger corporations that have access to it, and your buyer is going to be that. So that's what differentiates us. That's how we think the way we do. Most of us who have been around in this industry, and I'd be happy to talk to you guys more about your curiosities in this space.
So I'm going to make 2 points. One is to add to what was just said. Stanford runs a biodesign program. I don't know how many of you who are entrepreneurs in this medical space know of it, but they have actually made a science out of how to do needs-based medical device startup. And you can do the fellowship there, or you can take courses there, and they also have a book written by Paul Yock and Josh Backover and some of these really So just to add to how you get to train yourself to do a medical device startup. Number two, very important, is that it is not about the technology. You need a complete team. You need people who have knowledge and experience in sales and marketing from day one. You need people who are understanding and thinking ahead of the regulatory challenges. You need intellectual property, buttoned up. So it's a team effort, and the technology is just one piece. And this is from a guy who is a technology guy. So.
I was thinking, Gunjan, about, and you raised a very good point about how can we get some of these expensive technologies in India? Being from India, obviously that's very important. And yes, cost is an important factor, but I think there are other factors too that would help adopt, better medical technologies in India. Certainly access with telemedicine, but then there are other areas such as quality and standardization. And there's a product that I was fortunate enough to invent, and this is a product that actually is doing very well in India. It is not doing very well in the United States. And that's a replacement for a Pap test. This is for detecting cervical cancer. It's a big problem in India. And we developed a test that was a point-of-care test that would replace the Pap test in finding women who are suspicious of having cervical cancer. The problem is India does not have the kind of clear certified labs that exist in this country. And so when I talk to doctors over there, and these are at the famous institutions, they do their own quality checking. They will send that representative slide to 3 labs, and they'll do the internal quality analysis. They'll do, if 2 of the 3 say it's a certain thing, then they'll agree on that, because they cannot trust any one of those labs. Our technology basically replaced that. And so now, not only does it give them the quality and the standardization, but it also gives them the result right there, because who are you going to send the letter to? You don't always have, and the woman is never going to come back, especially if you tell her you have cancer. So that's the issue that this particular technology has solved, and that's why it's doing so well. So there are other areas that the medical device industry can really help in getting better care for people in India.
Thank you, thank you. Atul, any last thoughts?
Yes, my advice to entrepreneurs is twofold, and it's actually completely different from what you guys just said. First thing is, look in the mirror and know whether you're a marathon runner or a sprinter, because you really need to be persistent for a very long time. Otherwise, stop now. That's the best advice I can give. The second advice I would give is that be humble, realize that you know very little. No matter what you know very little. So to solve that, surround yourself with smart people. Formally, informally, doesn't matter. Just talk to people, find good advisors, create a network of mentors, and that's the way to go.
That's a great way to draw an end to this panel. I think we've had some tremendously great advice from 4 brilliant entrepreneurs at different stages of their company cycles. So would you join me in giving a round of applause for these wonderful people? And will you guys stick around if someone has one-on-one questions for you? Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much, audience. You've been a great audience.